Assalamu alaikum. Hello everyone. My name is Hassa Al Najjar. Today we will talk, me and my colleague Fatma Abel, about displacement profile of a crank motion and forces. So first of all, we can see that crank mechanism are used in various real life applications like internal combustion engine and CNC lathe machine, for example. Crank and slider mechanism turn circular movement into linear reciprocating movement or reciprocating movement into circular movement. So in the beginning, we started to identify and collect work panel parts together. Then we installed the thumb screw in the holes panel using 3 washers for each thumb screw. The work panel must be in landscape orientation as we did. Then we did identify and collect the crank wheel and slider rod parts and insert the slider rod in the linear scale and force inserted to rod clip on the slider rod to make the slider assembly. Then we inserted the slider rod in the crank arm and secure it by screw. After fixing all the crank ends, we turn the linear scale and the crank indicator to 0 so we can rotate the crank clockwise in steps of 10 degrees and note down the displacement from the linear scale in table appendix that we have, appendix C.
Hello everyone, I am Fatma Abel, and in this video I will be explaining the second part of this experiment, which is about crank force. And by following the equipment setup that my colleague Hassa explained it in this video in the beginning, we will continue the crank force experiment, but first we have to identify and collect the spring balance and pulley parts. Then we have to identify the location for the pulley on the work panel. After that, we have to install it by using thumb screw and washer. Then we have to install the bracket on the top of the work panel right above the crank wheel by using 2 thumb screws and washers. After that, we have to install the balance sub on the bracket to hang the spring balance. Then we have to cut the provided string and tie on into crank wheel and on the other end to the hook of the spring balance. Then we have to wrap the string around the crank wheel and make sure that the string is under tension. Now for the weight hanger, make sure that the total weight is 500 gram. If not, add or remove until 500 gram is reached. Next, cut another piece of string and tie on into the slider rod and the other into the weight hanger while running the string over the pulley. After the slider has pulled the crank and the crank becomes stationary, move the red clip to the 45 millimeter. Then adjust the crank angle indicator to 0 and set the spring balance to 0 also. After that, carefully slide the spring balance upwards by using the knob on the balance top and observe the crank wheels. Continue rotating the crank wheel in steps of 10 degrees and note down the forces from the spring balance and fill up the table in appendix D. After that, stop